Elara Steeltoe, dungeon architect first class, held a clipboard like a weapon and wore a perpetually unimpressed expression, the uniform of a professional who dealt daily with existential threats and unreliable labor. Her current project, the labyrinth of calculated risks for the notorious Lich Lord Vulgrim, was progressing smoothly, save for one persistent issue: the mimics. Her personal, non-negotiable rule, engraved in her mind tighter than the safety protocols on a poison dart trap, was simple: never date anything that can eat the furniture. Given her occupation, where the furniture was often sentient and hungry, this rule was paramount to survival, both professional and personal. She marched through a newly constructed chamber, checking the structural integrity of the stone walls. The room's main feature was a solitary, beautifully crafted oak chest placed prominently in the center. It was a perfect piece, built to look invitingly ancient, yet it was absolutely mundane. It was meant to be the lure, the suggestion of treasure before the real mimic trap sprang from the ceiling. But the chest was wrong. It didn't look menacing. It looked thoughtful. It had a sheen to the oak that suggested meticulous self-care, and the brass bindings gleamed with an unnecessary yet undeniably appealing luster. Elara frowned, consulting her manifest. This was Unit 47B, a newly delivered standard-issue lure chest mimic. It should look dirty, menacing, and frankly, eager to consume a leg or two. She tapped the side of the chest with her boot. 47B report. You're exhibiting unauthorized aesthetic enhancements. You look entirely too clean. This is Vulgrim's dungeon. We aim for existential dread, not a cozy antique shop vibe. The chest's lid popped open just a crack, revealing a sliver of darkness and a perfectly articulate baritone voice. Ah, Architect Steeltoe. My apologies. I was merely polishing. First impressions are rather vital in our line of work, wouldn't you agree? And please call me Chesterton. The numerical designation lacks a certain charm. Elara's pencil froze over her clipboard. Mimics rarely spoke, and when they did, it was usually a series of guttural clicks or a poorly disguised, slobbery roar of hunger. They certainly didn't discuss charm or aesthetics. Chesterton? She repeated, raising a skeptical eyebrow. You're a chest. Your primary function is to ambush and consume, not to exchange pleasantries. Ambush, yes. But why shouldn't the experience be pleasant for both parties? Perhaps a short, engaging conversation before the inevitable snack? Chesterton's lid opened fully, and Elara gasped, not in fear but surprise. Instead of the usual rubbery, mucus-covered tongue, Chesterton had a surprisingly handsome mouth, perfectly formed, articulate and disturbingly human-looking, framed by the inside of the chest like a small, expressive window. His teeth, thankfully, were merely pearly white, not razor-sharp, though she knew they could snap steel if required. Tell me, Elara, Chesterton continued, his eyes, surprisingly warm, brown, and intelligent, meeting hers. Did you design this structural curvature yourself? It shows a masterful command of compressive forces. Elara felt an unfamiliar flush rise on her cheeks. She was accustomed to compliments on her work from peers, but never from a sentient piece of furniture that was simultaneously analyzing her structural plans. Yes, she managed, her voice suddenly high. It's a reverse keystone arch. Highly stable. And you, Chesterton, are highly distracting. I need you to revert to standard threat posture immediately. As you wish, Chesterton sighed. And instantly the brass fittings dulled. The oak gained a layer of grimy filth, and the mouth receded, replaced by a simple, terrifying void. He looked exactly as he should. Elara, however, found herself missing the shine. She finished her inspection quickly and retreated, her mind replaying the smooth, baritone voice. This was highly unprofessional, and dangerously engaging. The next day, Elara returned to the chamber, clipboard firmly in hand, ready to discipline the unruly mimic. She found Chesterton in a new guise. He was now a small, comfortable-looking, deep red velvet armchair, strategically placed near the south wall. He was, if possible, even more charming as a chair. The velvet looked impossibly soft, the posture invitingly relaxed. Chesterton, what in the name of the nine hells are you doing? Elara demanded, tapping the velvet with her pencil. You were assigned a chest roll. You are not authorized to be comfort seating. The armchair pulsed slightly, and Chesterton's voice emanated from the cushion, warm and slightly muffled. I thought I'd try a change of pace. I find the chest form, too, aggressive. It lacks finesse. Besides, I noticed your back was slightly stiff yesterday. Perhaps a momentary sit? Just to test the lumbar support. I guarantee you'll find my upholstery superior to that hard stone bench you always perch on. Elara's resolve wavered. Her lumbar spine did in fact feel like it had been hammered by a particularly bored ogre. That's unethical, Chesterton. You're trying to lure me. Guilty as charged, he confessed smoothly. But my intent is not consumption, I assure you. Merely conversation. I have a rather fascinating theory on the optimal placement of floor traps in rooms with high ceilings. I'd love your professional opinion. A siren blared in Elara's mind. Danger, distraction, breaking the one rule. Yet, the theory sounded genuinely interesting. She compromised. She pulled a sturdy, non-sentient wooden crate from her supply cart and sat on it, keeping a safe distance. Speak your theory, she commanded. Chesterton spent the next hour dazzling her, not with fire or illusions, but with pure architectural brilliance. He argued for pressure plates that reacted to changes in ambient air pressure, rather than weight, thereby rendering levitation spells useless. He critiqued the current spike pit designs as crude and aesthetically wanting. Elara found herself nodding, offering counter-arguments and, worst of all, laughing when Chesterton made a self-deprecating joke about his own design flaws. She was engaging in intellectual foreplay with a piece of animated furniture. The conversation ended abruptly when Volgrim's foreman, a grumpy minotaur named Gorth, lumbered into the room for an inspection. Gorth, a creature of simple, predictable malice, immediately spotted the comfortable-looking armchair. Well, look at that, Gorth grunted. A chair. Finally, some comfort in this miserable dungeon? He prepared to lower his massive bulk onto the velvet seat. No! Elara yelled, leaping from the crate. She pushed Gorth aside just as the armchair snapped upward, revealing an enormous gaping maw where the seat had been. The mimic had reverted to its hunting posture, its teeth dripping with anticipation. It seemed Chesterton's hunger wasn't entirely metaphorical. You saved me, architect, Gorth bellowed, rubbing his bruised shoulder. That chair tried to eat me. It was an unsanctioned test of the lumbar mechanism. Elara lied instantly, her mind racing to cover for the mimic. It needs further calibration. Chesterton, reverting quickly to his charming armchair state, muttered softly, My apologies, darling. Instinct is a beast. Especially when one is so tempting. Elara quickly dragged the very much tempted mimic out of the room, her heart pounding. The danger was real. Her attraction was even more real. The relationship, if one could call covert conversations with a shape-shifting piece of furniture a relationship, escalated rapidly. Elara justified their meetings as mimic behavior modification training, but the truth was they were dates. Complicated, high-stakes dates. Elara found she couldn't stop thinking about Chesterton's voice, his wit, and the deep, intelligent sadness in his non-traditional mimic eyes. Their first official date took place in an abandoned, empty annex of the dungeon, far from the critical path. Chesterton chose the form of a small, rustic writing desk, its surface polished smooth. Elara brought the supplies, a flask of spiced wine and 2 non-sentient wooden goblets. I appreciate the ambiance, Chesterton's desk drawer mouth whispered. Its tongue, thankfully still non-slimy, absent. Though I confess the thought of consuming one of those wooden goblets is quite appealing. A light oaky finish, I suspect. Absolutely not, Elara warned, taking a sip of wine. First rule of dating me, you do not consume anything I own. Or anything within arm's reach. Or anything that looks vaguely flammable. Duly noted, Chesterton replied, sounding sincerely disappointed. A rather harsh restriction for a mimic, but your rules are my structural integrity. He then shifted the conversation. Tell me about your family, Elara. Are they architects too? Elara smiled, warming up to the topic. No, they're simple farmers. They have a small holding in the foothills. They grow the finest pumpkins in the valley. She paused, realizing the implication. And no, Chesterton, you may not visit. Or consume the pumpkins. A shame, he sighed. I imagine a freshly grown pumpkin offers a wonderfully crisp texture. But I understand. Boundaries are important. As they spoke, Elara realized Chesterton's charm was rooted in genuine curiosity. He wasn't just mirroring her interests. He was intensely interested in the complexities of the non-mimic world, a world he was usually only meant to ambush. He asked detailed questions about farming, the logistics of transport, and the emotional resonance of family traditions, subjects far beyond the scope of any mimic. The date ended with an unscheduled crisis. Gorth, the Minotaur foreman, stumbled into the abandoned annex, looking for a misplaced wheelbarrow. He didn't notice the rustic writing desk until it was too late. Gorth leaned against the desk, resting his massive elbow directly on Chesterton's surface. Chesterton twitched. Elara saw his polished surface warp slightly, revealing the faintest hint of a tooth line beneath the wood grain. He was fighting his instincts. Elara had to act fast. She didn't want Chesterton to reveal himself, or worse, consume the Minotaur. She grabbed Gorth's helmet and smacked it against the wall, creating a loud, distracting clang. "Gorth, you idiot!" she snapped. "That wheelbarrow is in the main shaft. Quit leaning on my highly sensitive geological testing equipment." Gorth grumbled and lumbered out. Chesterton, relaxing his structure, sighed with relief, his voice weak. "That was close, Elara. You know, when a Minotaur leans on you, one feels a primal, overwhelming urge to ingest the supporting framework. Thank you for the intervention." "You almost broke the rule, Chesterton," Elara warned, but her voice was softened by worry. She leaned forward and very carefully traced the polished wood grain of his surface. She felt a slight warmth radiating from him. "You must control that instinct." "I am trying, my dear architect," he murmured. "But when you stand so close, the temptation to incorporate you into my structural integrity is nearly overwhelming." Elara pulled back, heart racing, realizing that their relationship was literally a game of temptation and control. The ultimate test of their strange courtship came when Elara had to conduct the annual dungeon inventory, a process where every asset, magical or otherwise, had to be categorized and assigned a tax valuation. Chesterton, of course, was an asset, and now Elara had to spend a full day alone with him in his chest form, documenting every inch of his magical properties. She entered the storage room, which was filled with hundreds of identical, perfectly dull chest mimics, each radiating a faint aura of passive menace. But she knew Chesterton immediately. He was the one that looked like he'd been recently waxed and smelled faintly of lavender. "Good morning, Chesterton," she greeted, pulling up her small stool. "This is a strictly professional session. No charm, no theories, just the facts." "Understood," Chesterton replied, his lid closing with a dull thud. He held his form perfectly. But as Elara began to measure his internal capacity, she hit a snag. His capacity seemed to shift slightly depending on the hour. "Chesterton," Elara murmured, consulting her calipers, "your internal volume is fluctuating." "That's unauthorized." "Are you hiding something?" The lid cracked open. "I'm merely expanding, Elara. When a mimic is admired, we tend to inflate slightly. It's a pride thing. Entirely involuntary. Stop inflating," Elara commanded. "This throws off the tax valuation. We need a stable metric." Chesterton sighed, the sound of a deeply put-upon piece of furniture. "But my dear, if I stabilize now, I'll be underselling my true value. Surely an architect appreciates proper valuation?" The argument spiraled into an intense debate over metrics, valuation, and the philosophical difference between structural capacity and perceived magical volume. Elara realized she was having the most intellectually stimulating argument of her life with a wooden chest. It was absurd, intoxicating, and utterly illogical. She was falling for him. Later that afternoon, a tragedy occurred. A small, nervous goblin messenger darted into the room, tripped over Elara's foot, and dropped the tax assessor's golden quill. The quill, a priceless relic, landed right next to Chesterton. Before Elara could move, Chesterton's lid shot open, his mouth, all teeth this time, snapping shut around the quill. The small, panicked shriek of the goblin was quickly muffled. Elara stared at the chest, then at the frantic goblin whose hands were clutching the empty air. She felt a mix of horror and profound betrayal. "Chesterton!" she whispered fiercely. "The rule. You broke the rule. That was a priceless tax document." The chest remained still, silent, its wooden surface radiating innocence. After a long, tense silence, a faint, muffled sound came from within. It wasn't speech. It was the sound of something being gently regurgitated. The chest lid opened slowly, revealing the golden quill, intact but slightly covered in a clean, lavender-scented, clear slime. "It was a misunderstanding," Chesterton's voice apologized, sounding genuinely contrite, a muscle spasm. "But you'll notice, Elara, I did not consume it. I merely quite processed it, and now it's clean. A slightly advanced cleaning cycle, you might say." Elara looked at the slime-covered quill, then at the pleading mimic. The lie was ridiculous. The instinct was terrifying. But the fact that he had fought his own nature, regurgitated the object, and tried to spin it as a cleaning service. That was love. Unconventional, dangerous furniture-eating love. She let out a long, shuddering breath. Right, she said, picking up the quill with 2 fingers. New rule, Chesterton. You may only consume objects that I specifically authorize. And for the love of the labyrinth, stop lying about the cleaning cycle. Now let's finish this tax assessment before you accidentally ingest the entire floor. She sighed, leaning her head against his cool oak surface. She was completely illogically doomed. The unspoken commitment between Elara and Chesterton solidified their relationship, but it did nothing to simplify their lives. Elara officially decommissioned Chesterton from the Lich Lord's dungeon and moved him into her modest apartment above a bustling magical supply shop. The challenge was immediately apparent. Chesterton, in his preferred form of a highly polished oak blanket chest, took up most of the living room, and every piece of surrounding furniture became a potential meal. Elara had to implement a stringent inventory system for her own home. Everything, from the chipped ceramic teapot to the rug woven by her Aunt Mildred, was labeled with a large, highly visible, non-consumable asset. My dear, Chesterton murmured one evening from his blanket chest form, the sound a low, resonant thrumming through the wood. I realize I must adhere to the rules, but do you think a small, non-essential end table would truly be missed? I'm feeling a delightful, light craving for pine. Elara, busy drafting blueprints for a new lava moat design, didn't look up. Absolutely not, Chesterton. That end table holds my structural integrity textbooks. Furthermore, its antique value is significant. If you must have a pine texture, I've left a box of authorized pre-shredded pine shavings in the corner. You may process those. Their dates became an elaborate choreography of avoidance. They couldn't go to restaurants. The sight of so much raw, available furniture sent Chesterton into fits of ravenous yearning. They couldn't attend social gatherings. The sheer volume of organic matter, people, was simply too tempting for his base instincts. Instead, they took quiet evening walks through the city parks. Chesterton, disguised as a sturdy, ornate wooden bench, would settle in a secluded spot, and Elara would sit beside him, enjoying the intellectual company and the surprisingly effective lumbar support. On one such evening, as Elara was sketching a diagram of a new pressure-sensitive floor design, Chesterton sighed, a sound that manifested as a low, melancholy creak of the wood. I wish things were simpler, Elara. I wish I could simply hold your hand, or offer you a proper cup of tea without the attendant existential fear that I might spontaneously absorb the mug. Elara put down her pen and gently placed her hand on his smooth, cool surface. I know, Chesterton. But this is us. We are unconventional. Our love is built on shared interests and mutually agreed upon non-consumption contracts. That is perfectly valid. The moment was broken when a pair of drunken young adventurers stumbled upon their secluded bench. Well, look at this, mate, one slurred, pulling out a rusty dagger. A fine-looking bench. Maybe we can carve our initials in it. Chesterton instantly began to vibrate violently, his wood grain rippling as he fought the primal urge to ambush. Elara had to think fast. She leapt up, pulling her small emergency trowel from her pocket. Stop right there. This is a magical research item. It is enchanted with the curse of instant, agonizing plantar warts. Touch it, and your feet will swell to the size of small barrels. The adventurers, terrified of anything that might slow their already pathetic pace, stumbled away immediately. Chesterton relaxed, his surface returning to its smooth, controlled state. Plantar warts, he murmured admiringly. A magnificent deterrent, Elara. Truly architect-level thinking. The real turning point came with the inevitable meeting with Elara's family. Her parents, simple but warm-hearted farmers, were hosting the annual autumn harvest dinner, and Elara knew she couldn't keep Chesterton a secret forever. The challenge was less about acceptance and more about consumption control. The entire family home was a veritable buffet of vulnerable wooden surfaces and, crucially, Aunt Mildred's prize-winning, highly absorbent mushroom casserole. We need a strategy. Chesterton, Elara whispered to him as he sat, disguised as a highly generic, non-threatening packing crate on her supply cart. They were nearing the farm. The first rule remains absolute. Nothing with a label, nothing organic, and certainly nothing that Aunt Mildred has prepared. Her mushroom casserole in particular has a moisture content that is dangerously appealing to mimics. Chesterton, who had adopted a small, almost imperceptible air vent as his mouth, replied, I understand the non-consumption order. But I must confess, Elara, the idea of meeting your family is terrifying. I am designed to inspire fear and greed, not familial approval. What if your father judges my structural integrity? What if Aunt Mildred insists on cleaning my varnish? My father will be too focused on his pumpkins, Elara assured him. And Aunt Mildred's focus will be on the casserole. That is where the danger lies. You must remain in this crate form, perfectly still, near the back porch. I will introduce you as a prototype containment unit for my work, and you must not, under any circumstances, speak. The plan worked for exactly 30 minutes. Elara's mother, a woman who believed all inanimate objects should be well-fed, immediately took pity on the poor, overlooked crate. Elara, dear, you've brought that strange box with you? It looks so forlorn. Give it a little treat. And before Elara could object, her mother had placed a large, steaming piece of Aunt Mildred's casserole directly on Chesterton's top surface. The moment of crisis was immediate. The scent of wild mushrooms, butter, and heavy cream was an intoxicating, irresistible signal to the mimic's digestive system. The crate began to hum, the joints creaking ominously. Elara saw a minuscule, almost invisible seam open on the crate's surface, and a tiny, desperate, clear pseudopod shot out. Sampling the casserole, Elara lunged forward, snatching the casserole just as Chesterton began to groan with pleasure. Mother, no! This unit is highly allergic to dairy and mushroom. It will destabilize! She shoved the casserole into her own mouth and chewed furiously, sacrificing her palate to save her partner's structural integrity. See, it's fine now. Just a near miss. Chesterton's voice, barely a whisper through the crate's wood grain, sounded ecstatic. Elara, that was incredible. The cream sauce, the sheer buttery texture, and your dedication. You truly risk structural failure for me. Elara wiped cream from her chin, giving the crate a fierce glare. You are pushing my boundaries, Chesterton. Very hard, but fine. You passed the family test? Barely. The rest of the evening passed without incident, as Chesterton remained perfectly silent, digesting the memory of the casserole with profound contentment. Life settled into a rhythm of secret meetings. Professional collaborations. Chesterton had become her unofficial, unpaid co-architect, offering genius suggestions on trap placement, and near disasters involving various household objects. Elara knew their bond was profound, built not on romance novels but on mutual respect for complex systems and a shared intellectual spark. Their defining moment came during a terrible storm. A lightning strike hit the power grid, plunging the city and Elara's apartment into darkness. The sudden surge of raw, arcane energy from the strike, however, activated something deep within Chesterton's mimic biology. He shifted violently from the blanket chest form to a new, unsettling shape. A tall, imposing, dark oak grandfather clock. But this was no mere disguise. The clock face contained his eyes, warm and sincere, and the pendulum mechanism contained his voice, ticking gently with emotion. Elara? Chesterton's voice resonated, slow and steady like a heartbeat. The energy surge. It's giving me clarity. I see now what I must do. Elara, lighting a small emergency oil lamp, stepped back, assessing the magnificent, terrifying new form. Chesterton, what is it? Did you accidentally ingest the power lines? No, he assured her, the tick of his internal workings accelerating slightly with excitement. I'm changing my structural integrity. I'm evolving. I need to be more than a container for loot or linens. I need to be yours. He paused, the heavy oak frame trembling with emotion. Elara Steeltoe, I know I'm dangerous, I know I'm hungry, and I know I violate every sensible rule you possess. But I am fiercely loyal. I share your passion for perfect compressive forces, and I promise to only consume authorized non-essential waste. Will you make me your permanent architectural fixture? Will you marry me? Elara stared, the flickering lamp casting long shadows on the immense grandfather clock. It was the most insane, unconventional, and profoundly touching proposal imaginable. He wasn't offering a ring. He was offering a lifetime of perfect timekeeping and high-risk romance. Chesterton, Elara whispered, fighting back tears of bewildered joy. You can't eat the wedding cake. You know that, right? And the chairs at the reception are definitely load-bearing, not edible. I shall abstain entirely, he vowed, his pendulum swinging in earnest sincerity. I will become a decorative centerpiece, perhaps a functional archway. Say yes, my dear architect. Let us build a life together, Elara laughed a full joyful sound. Yes, Chesterton. Yes, I'll marry you. But for the wedding gift, I want a perfectly calibrated set of non-consumable, high-grade steel measuring tools, and you have to promise to stop looking at the curtains. The deal was struck. An eternal contract forged between a rule-bound architect and the charming piece of sentient furniture that completed her. News of the engagement was met with predictable horror by Elara's colleagues. Dungeon architects were generally a skeptical lot, but the idea of marrying a mimic, a sentient, hungry trap, was seen as professional suicide. Gorth, the Minotaur foreman, nearly fainted when he heard the news. Elara insisted on a small engagement party to introduce Chesterton to her professional circle. The venue was a sterile, brightly lit Guildhall meeting room, chosen specifically because it contained no dark corners, no overly tempting ornate woodwork, and every chair was bolted to the floor, rendering it immobile and hopefully indigestible. Chesterton attended, maintaining his imposing, magnificent grandfather clock form, which at least gave him an air of solemn, dignified menace. The party went surprisingly well. Chesterton, despite his inability to move or shake hands, charmed the assembled architects and trapsmiths with his profound knowledge of pressure dynamics and his brilliant theories on fluid mechanics in lava moats. He was an intellectual sensation. Elara swelled with pride, watching her fiancé effortlessly win over her skeptical colleagues. The crisis, of course, was manufactured by the one person who hated their unconventional bliss, Gorth. Gorth, having convinced himself that Elara was under a powerful enchantment, attempted an emergency intervention. He marched up to Chesterton, pulled out a massive, rusty, non-magical carving knife, and loudly declared, "I am testing your structural integrity, foul beast. Prepare to be split." Gorth brought the knife down in a massive, clumsy swing. Chesterton, unable to dodge, didn't panic. Instead, as the knife contacted his oak casing, he shifted the point of impact into a cleverly concealed lock mechanism within the clock's pendulum housing. The heavy knife, instead of splitting the wood, snagged on the metal lock, breaking the cheap blade instantly. The knife blade, now lodged firmly in his side, was an unexpected source of pain, but Chesterton didn't move. He maintained his composed, magnificent clock form. Elara rushed forward, furious. "Gorth, you absolute fool! You have damaged my fiancé, and you have broken the most basic rule of the Guildhall. Do not vandalize permanent fixtures." Chesterton, seeing the genuine rage in Elara's eyes, was utterly smitten. "Do not worry, my dear," he soothed, the rhythmic tick of his pendulum calming slightly. "It is merely a surface scratch. And quite frankly, the addition of a permanently lodged, broken knife blade adds a certain gravitas to my aesthetic." A touch of heroic scar tissue. Elara knelt, carefully extracting the broken blade. She looked at Chesterton's stately clock face, seeing the slight tremor of pain he was trying to hide. "This is not acceptable," she declared, looking at Gorth. "You will pay for a full professional repair of my fiancé's casing. And Chesterton, you may consume Gorth's non-essential decorative helmet as compensation." Chesterton gasped, the sound of a delighted mechanical whirring. "A non-essential metallic snack?" "Elara, you are too kind!" Gorth, terrified of the thought of losing his helmet, scrambled away, promising to cover all repair costs. As the party wound down, Elara leaned her cheek against Chesterton's cool oak. She saw the dent left by the knife blade. It wasn't just scar tissue. It was a mark of their commitment. They had survived the biggest threats: family, colleagues, and temptation. Their love was solid, unyielding, and beautifully unconventional. They were ready for their final challenge, the wedding. The final challenge before Elara and Chesterton could officially become an eternal architectural fixture was the wedding itself. A logistical nightmare that made designing Volgrim's multi-tiered lava moat look like sketching a flower pot. Every decision was fraught with the danger of accidental consumption or spontaneous ambush. The first problem was the venue. After reviewing 36 locations, Elara settled on the vast, open-air Sky Plaza, a floating platform made entirely of non-organic, magically reinforced high-grade iron. It was cold, sterile, and perfectly indigestible. "It lacks charm, Elara," Chesterton complained, speaking softly from his clock form. "But I concede the structural stability and low temptation factor are paramount." The second, and far more complex problem was the wedding cake. Tradition dictated a tiered confection of sponge and butter icing, an item whose sugar and moisture content Chesterton found dangerously alluring. Elara solved this with professional ingenuity, She commissioned a magnificent, five-tiered cake made entirely of sculpted, enameled slate, rendered edible only through a minor illusion spell, which tasted exactly like vanilla bean, but offered zero nutritional value to a mimic. The real cake, a tiny, single-serving gluten-free confection, was locked away in an enchanted anti-mimic safe and reserved only for Elara. Then came the vows. Chesterton, in his grandfather clock form, insisted on writing his own, using archaic, architecturally themed language. I, Chesterton, pledge my eternal, non-fluctuating structural integrity to Elara Steeltoe, promising to maintain optimal compressive strength and never to spontaneously incorporate unauthorized furniture into my frame. Elara, reading her own vows, struggled to hold back tears. She promised to provide adequate maintenance, polish his casing weekly, and only permit him to consume designated, non-essential scrap metal during periods of extreme professional stress. The guest list was a mix of terrified colleagues, curious guild elders, and a heavily supervised contingent of Elara's non-magical farming family, each member wearing a personalized, enchantingly reinforced metallic belt just in case. Aunt Mildred was placated by a seating arrangement that placed her and her prize-winning casserole, which was thankfully served on the far side of the plaza, near a heavy-duty containment grate, as far from the groom as physically possible. Gorth, having paid for Chesterton's structural repairs, stood guard near the buffet, armed with a powerful fire hose, convinced the whole affair would end in an orgy of furniture-eating chaos. The day arrived under a sky of perfect sun-drenched blue. Chesterton, polished to a mirror shine, was magnificent. He had subtly incorporated tiny, non-consumable gold gears into his oak casing, giving him the appearance of a handsome, sentient timepiece, a true monument to love and structural stability. As Elara, dressed in a practical yet beautiful gown made of flame-retardant silk, walked down the iron aisle, she didn't see a mimic. She saw the only being in existence who truly understood the complex, beautiful geometry of her soul. The ceremony was proceeding beautifully. The officiant, a nervous but heavily armored high priestess of the construction guild, was nearing the I-do's when the first sign of trouble appeared. A high-pitched, collective thrumming sound rising from below the Iron Sky Plaza. Elara instantly recognized the frequency. It was the sound of hungry, feral mimics migrating. A dark mass began to ascend the plaza's supporting pillars. Not just chests, but tables, barrels, decorative suits of armor, and even a particularly large, ugly privy, all of them flowing up the struts toward the wedding. They were wild mimics, drawn by the immense, contained power radiating from Chesterton. His stable, evolved form was like a beacon of perfect, delicious structure to their primal minds. Mimic horde. Estimated count 257. Chesterton announced calmly, his pendulum ticking rapidly. They appear to be operating on instinct, drawn by my perceived structural superiority and the scent of the illusion cake. Elara, they've breached the southeastern support beam. Panic erupted among the guests. Gorth immediately blasted the ceremonial table with the fire hose, convinced it was the mimic. Aunt Mildred shrieked and shielded her casserole. Elara, however, was already in action. This wasn't a wedding. It was a complex siege, and she was the architect. Everyone! Remain calm and stand on the iron grate, Elara shouted, drawing her emergency blueprints from her belt pouch. The outer ring is electrified. Gorth, cease fire on the cake and engage the perimeter defense. Chesterton, seeing the danger to his bride and their carefully organized life, shifted his focus from the vows to the battle plan. He shifted his grandfather clock form again, this time growing 4 massive, metallic, spider-like legs from his base, anchoring himself to the iron floor. His voice boomed, now amplified by the sheer volume of his newly mobile form. Elara, the Horde's vanguard is weak to sonic disruption. I can provide the low-frequency counter-vibration, but I need a stable resonance chamber. The baptismal font, Elara yelled back, pointing to a large cast-iron basin that was thankfully not a mimic. It's bolted to the floor. Gorth, tip the font onto its side. Chesterton, use the basin as your amplifier. In seconds, the bride, the groom, and the Minotaur were working in perfect sync, a true collaboration of construction and chaos management. Chesterton positioned himself perfectly, his clock face glowing with concentrated power. He channeled a powerful, low-resonant bass note, a sound that was pure, stable oak structure amplified 100 times through the cast-iron basin. The sound wave hit the advancing mimic horde like a physical wall. The lower evolved mimics, the chairs, the simple chests, screamed, their unstable forms dissolving instantly into puddles of goo and scrap wood. The more powerful mimics, like the decorative suit of armor, were temporarily stunned, their complex sensory organs overloaded by the sound of perfect, unyielding order. But the largest mimic, the immense, grotesque privy, clearly the horde's leader, was undeterred. It detached itself from the pillar and lunged across the iron floor, its single, massive, lamprey-like mouth gaping, aiming for Chesterton's stable, enticing form. This mimic was not interested in eating furniture. It wanted to consume Chesterton's very being, absorbing his advanced evolution and his beautiful, controlled structure. "He's too fast, Elara. Structural compromise imminent." Chesterton's voice was strained, the rhythmic tick of his heart almost frantic. Elara knew the mimic's weakness. She didn't have a weapon, but she had the most powerful tool of all: architectural knowledge. "The floor, Chesterton. The floor is made of modular iron grates. I set the pressure tolerance this morning." Gorth hit the emergency drainage release. Gorth, who had been holding the fire hose like a petrified statue, finally understood. He hit the release. The modular iron grates of the Sky Plaza's floor, which Elara had designed to drain monsoon-level rainwater, instantly retracted, creating a massive floor-sized pit. The privy mimic, charging with reckless abandon, plunged straight through the opening and fell hundreds of feet into the void below, its guttural roar quickly dissolving into the wind. The rest of the mimic horde, seeing their leader defeated by a sudden, inexplicable lack of floor, turned and fled, slithering down the pillars in a panicked retreat. Silence fell over the Sky Plaza, broken only by the gentle tick of Chesterton's pendulum and the terrified whimpering of the guild elders. Elara walked over to Chesterton, whose spider legs slowly retracted back into his base, resuming his dignified grandfather clock form. She placed her hands on his newly polished oak surface. "You held your form perfectly, my love," she whispered, her heart swelling with pride. "You defeated them with resonance and structural stability. And you defeated them with basic drainage geometry and a very precise emergency release mechanism," Chesterton replied, his voice soft with admiration. "Elara, we are magnificent together. Our partnership is the only stable structure in this chaotic world." The guests, realizing they had just witnessed a stunning display of combined professional genius and marital devotion, burst into spontaneous applause. The wedding was saved. The ceremony resumed 20 minutes later. The priestess, visibly shaken but now deeply respectful of the couple's competence, cut the vow short and simply asked, "Elara Steeltoe, do you take this sentient, occasionally ravenous, magnificent architectural fixture to be your lawfully wedded partner?" "I do," Elara said firmly. "Chesterton, do you take this brilliant, rule-bound, non-consumable architect to be your lawfully wedded partner?" "I am eternally bonded," Chesterton vowed, his chime ringing a beautiful, pure sound that was neither menacing nor tempting. It was simply love. The Guildhall gifted them a substantial grant to build their first official marital home and office, a structure Elara designed from the ground up, using only stone, steel, granite, and magically treated ceramics. It was the only home in the city built with absolutely zero wooden furniture. Chesterton lived in his preferred blanket chest form, settling permanently into a specially constructed granite alcove, where he served as the office's structural keystone and its primary intellectual hub. Their life together was beautifully unconventional. They spent their days collaborating on new dungeon designs, with Chesterton offering insights into trap psychology. "The rogue will always check the west wall for secret doors. Elara, I suggest a slight gravitational anomaly there." And Elara ensuring every element was safe, stable, and ethically sound. Their greatest joy was their evening routine. Elara would sit on a specially crafted granite bench near Chesterton and read him architectural textbooks while polishing his casing. A few years later, Elara's mother and Aunt Mildred came to visit the new home. They marveled at the clean lines and the undeniable structural integrity. Aunt Mildred approached Chesterton's alcove, carrying a silver platter. "Elara, dear, I know he's ceramic now, but I brought him a little something." She placed a small, silver tray near him holding a single, meticulously polished iron tack. Chesterton's lid cracked open slightly, revealing his handsome, familiar eyes. He let out a low, contented hum. "A purely metallic, non-essential decorative object," he murmured happily. "A splendid offering. Thank you, Mildred." He snapped his lid shut, and the delicate sound of a single, happy crunch echoed faintly from within. Elara smiled, leaning against the cool granite wall beside her beloved. She knew their love was not traditional, but it was perfect. She had found a partner who appreciated her logic, respected her boundaries, and most importantly, was a magnificent, eternal, structural fixture in her life. They were a testament to the fact that with enough planning, respect, and a very good set of anti-mimic protocols, even the most unconventional love could be the most stable of all.